The video had been live for 8 hours when Eleanor Blackwood first saw it. 8 hours, 3.7 million views, thousands of comments, each one a small knife twisting in her gut as she watched her father, Commander Jack Blackwood, Navy SEAL legend, the man who'd taught her everything that mattered, take a hit he'd never return. The footage was shaky, filmed on someone's phone. Vertical video, the amateur kind that somehow always went viral. The setting was mundane, a small-town garage, oil stains on concrete. The smell of motor oil and Montana mountain air you could almost taste through the screen. Her father stood there in his work coveralls, grease on his hands, silver hair catching the afternoon light. 65 years old and still carrying himself like the operator he'd been for 3 decades. Shoulders back, eyes forward. That same calm she remembered from childhood, the steadiness that made you believe everything would be all right. Then the man, Garrett Crossland, the caption identified him, stepped into frame. Garrett was younger, maybe 35, with the build of someone who spent more time in the gym than anywhere useful. Chest puffed out, arms crossed. That particular swagger that screamed insecurity to anyone who'd seen real operators move. 5 other men flanked him, a small army or a small man's ego. The audio was tinny, compressed by whatever algorithm YouTube used, but the words came through clear enough. "You think you're special, old man?" Garrett's voice dripped with contempt. "You think that Navy SEAL shit matters anymore? Your time is done." Jack said something Elle couldn't quite hear. Something calm, reasonable. The way he always spoke when violence was an option he'd already chosen not to take. That's when Garrett pushed him. Jack stumbled back half a step but didn't raise his hands, didn't shift his weight. Didn't do any of the 1,000 things Elle knew he could do, had done in places most people couldn't point to on a map. "Fight back, you coward!" Garrett shouted. The crowd that had gathered, maybe 20 people faces Elle didn't recognize, stayed silent. Watching, recording. No one intervened. Jack spoke again. 3 words Elle read on his lips, more than heard. "I don't want." Garrett's hand moved fast. A wide slap that connected with Jack's face with a sound like a gunshot in the enclosed space. "Shut up, old man." Jack went down. Not stumbling, not catching himself gracefully, just down, hitting the concrete hard enough that Elle knew it hurt, knew her father would carry that bruise for days. Blood at the corner of his mouth, silver hair disheveled, and that look in his eyes, not anger, not fear, something worse, shame. The video ended there, cutting to black with Garrett's laugh still echoing. The uploader, some kid named Wyatt Crossland, probably Garrett's son, had captioned it, "Navy SEAL legend gets destroyed. Old generation is done." Elle watched it 3 times before Senior Chief Riker Donovan found her. She was standing in the equipment room at Naval Amphibious Base Coronado, surrounded by the tools of her trade. Rifles lined the walls in perfect rows, suppressors, optics, the smell of gun oil and salt air from the Pacific just beyond the compound. This was her world, now had been for 9 years since she'd earned her trident. First female SEAL instructor at Coronado. 47 confirmed kills across 4 deployments. Reputation built on competence so undeniable that even the old guard respected her. None of it mattered watching that video. "Ma'am," Donovan's voice cut through her focus. Senior Chief Petty Officer Riker Donovan, former Ranger who'd crossed over to SEAL Team 5 6 years back. Good operator, better friend. One of the few men at Coronado who'd never once questioned whether she belonged. She didn't turn around. "You've seen it." "Everyone's seen it, ma'am." He moved to stand beside her, eyes on her phone screen as she replayed the video for the 4th time. "That's Master Chief Blackwood, your father." Not a question. Everyone in the SEAL community knew Jack Blackwood. 3 Navy crosses, Battle of Mogadishu, 1993. Desert Storm before that. 30 years of operations that officially didn't exist and unofficially made him a legend. He didn't fight back, Elle said quietly. No, ma'am, he didn't. Do you know why? Donovan was silent for a moment. When he spoke, his voice carried the weight of someone who understood things that couldn't be taught in training. Because he didn't have to. Elle finally looked at him. Donovan was 40, weathered in the way special operators got after too many deployments, too many nights in places where the wrong choice meant you didn't come home. But his eyes were clear, steady. The comments section thinks he's weak, she said. The comments section is full of people who've never held a rifle, let alone been in a gunfight. 3.7 million people watched my father get beaten in the street, Chief. They're calling him a coward, pathetic, washed up. Her voice stayed level professional, but her grip on the phone made her knuckles white. They're wrong. Yes, ma'am, they are. So, we're going to teach them why. Donovan nodded once. When do we leave? Pinewood Springs, Montana was the kind of town that showed up in postcards and nowhere else. Population 2,800, give or take whoever'd moved away for college and never looked back. Main Street had 12 businesses, including the diner that served breakfast all day and the hardware store that doubled as the town's social hub. Mountains rose on 3 sides, the Rockies wearing their autumn colors like a painting some optimistic artist thought might sell to tourists. Jack Blackwood had moved here after retirement, bought himself a cabin on Lake Stillwater, 12 miles from town, and tried to become invisible. For 7 years, it had worked. The garage Blackwood Precision, specializing in classic muscle cars and whatever else rolled through the door, sat on the eastern edge of town where Main Street gave way to county roads and pine forests. Single-story sheet metal walls, 3 bays that usually held Chevelles and Camaros in various states of restoration. Today, it held ghosts. Jack stood in the middle bay, wrench in hand, staring at the '69 Firebird he'd been working on for the last 6 weeks. Customer was a rancher named Bill Hartwick. Good man, paid on time, never complained about the hours Jack put in. The car's engine was half disassembled on the workbench, carburetor pieces laid out with the precision of a man who'd once field-stripped an M4 in total darkness while someone tried to kill him. His hands didn't shake. They never shook anymore, not since he'd learned to control that particular betrayal of his nervous system. But they didn't move either, just held the wrench useless weight in his palm. The video had dropped yesterday. By this morning, everyone in Pinewood Springs had seen it. Mrs. Patricia Thornhill hadn't made eye contact when he'd stopped for coffee at the diner. Bill Hartwick had called to say he'd pick up the Firebird next month instead of next week, maybe give Jack some time to sort things out. The kid who pumped gas at Mackenzie's station had smirked when Jack filled up the truck. 30 years of service, 3 Navy crosses, operations in 17 countries. All of it reduced to 8 seconds of footage where he looked exactly like what Garrett Crossland said he was. Weak. Finished. Irrelevant. The bell above the garage door chimed. Jack didn't turn around. We're closed. Since when do Blackwoods close for anything? That voice. Clear, strong, carrying the kind of authority that made men with twice her years snap to attention. Jack set down the wrench, slowly, carefully, buying himself 2 seconds to compose the expression he'd wear when he turned around. Eleanor stood in the doorway, backlit by afternoon sun, and for a moment Jack saw her mother. Same height, 5'3", compact power, in a small frame. Same blonde hair pulled back in a no-nonsense ponytail. Same eyes, that particular shade of blue that could be gentle or glacial depending on what the situation required. Right now, they were glacial. Elle, he kept his voice neutral. You didn't need to come. Didn't I? She stepped into the garage and another man followed her, big 40-something moving with the particular economy of motion that marked special operations personnel. This is Senior Chief Donovan, my second at Coronado. Donovan nodded. Master Chief, honor to meet you, sir. I'm not Master Chief anymore, Jack said. Haven't been for 8 years. Some titles you never stop earning, sir. Jack looked at his daughter, really looked. She wore civilian clothes, jeans, boots, black t-shirt, but carried herself like she was still in uniform. No visible weapons, but he'd trained her well enough to know she didn't need visible weapons. Elle could kill a man 6 different ways with her bare hands, and that was before you factored in what she could do with a rifle at 1,000 yards. I can handle this, he said, by letting Garrett Crossland beat you on camera for 4 million people to see, 3.7 million last I checked. Elle's expression didn't change. Violence isn't the answer, Dad. You taught me that. Then why are you here? Because accountability is. She moved deeper into the garage, eyes scanning the space with the tactical awareness he'd drilled into her from age 8. And because I watched that video 17 times, trying to understand why you didn't fight back, then I remembered Somalia. Jack's jaw tightened. That was 32 years ago. You think PTSD has an expiration date? The silence that fell between them carried weight. Donovan, to his credit, stayed by the door, giving them space, but staying alert. Good operator. Knew when to be present and when to be invisible. It's not the same, Jack finally said. Isn't it? Elle stopped 3 feet away, close enough that he could see the concern beneath the steel in her eyes. You nearly killed Harrison Kincaid in a PTSD flashback after Mogadishu. 30 stitches, broken jaw, you don't remember any of it. That's why you don't fight anymore. You're terrified of what you become when you lose control. I'm terrified of hurting people who don't deserve it. Garrett Crossland deserves it. Maybe. Jack picked up a shop rag, wiped grease from his hands with methodical care. But the moment I hit him, I prove him right. I become the thing I've spent 32 years controlling. I become the monster. Elle watched him for a long moment. When she spoke, her voice had softened just slightly. Dad, you've had control for 3 decades. You chose not to fight Garrett. That's not weakness. That's the hardest thing a warrior ever does. Tell that to the comments section. I don't care about the comments section. I care about you. She paused. And I care about the dozen other people Garrett's terrorized in this town. The elderly widow he extorts. The single parents he intimidates. The high school girl he's letting his son torture online. You're not his first victim, Dad. You're just the one he could humiliate publicly. Jack looked up at that. What girl? Ainsley Whitmore, Sheriff Whitmore's daughter. Garrett's son Wyatt has been cyberbullying her for 3 months. She hasn't been to school in 2 weeks. Elle pulled out her phone, swiped through screens, held it up. These are the messages Wyatt sent her. You want to read them, or should I summarize? Jack didn't take the phone. He'd seen enough ugliness in his life. Where's Dalton? Why hasn't he arrested Wyatt? Because Garrett has County Supervisor Burke in his pocket, and Burke makes sure nothing sticks to Garrett or his son. Elle lowered the phone. This isn't just about you, Dad. It's about a pattern. Garrett's been running a protection racket in this town for 3 years. 31 businesses paying him monthly insurance. Anyone who refuses gets vandalized, harassed, or worse. And you know this, how? Because Senior Chief Donovan and I have been in town for 2 days doing what SEALs do reconnaissance. She glanced at Donovan, who pulled a tablet from his backpack and brought it forward. Sir, Donovan said, we've documented 12 assaults, 31 cases of extortion, and multiple counts of witness intimidation, all leading back to Garrett Crossland. He operates out of Crossland Auto Salvage, keeps 4 to 6 men on permanent payroll, and has enough pull with local government that the sheriff can't touch him. Jack took the tablet, scrolled through the documentation. Bank records, testimony transcripts, photos. Professional work, the kind of intelligence package that would hold up in federal court. How long did this take you? He asked. 48 hours, Elle said. And we're not done. But we needed you to understand this isn't about revenge. It's about accountability. It's about showing an entire town that bullies only have power if good people stay silent. Jack handed the tablet back. What's your plan? To teach Garrett Crossland a lesson he'll never forget. Without violence. Elle smiled then, and it wasn't a pleasant expression. Dad, you taught me that real warriors don't need to fight. They solve problems before problems become fights. Garrett wants to humiliate you again publicly. Tomorrow at noon, Town Square. He posted the challenge 6 hours ago. Jack hadn't seen that. Hadn't checked his phone since morning. He wants a rematch. He wants a spectacle. And we're going to give him one. Elle's voice hardened. But not the one he expects. What are you going to do? What you taught me. Demonstrate competence. Expose weakness. Let consequences do the rest. She moved toward the door, then paused. You once told me the hardest trigger to pull is the one you don't pull. Tomorrow I'm going to show this town what that means. Elle, I'm not asking permission, Dad. I'm asking you to trust me. Jack looked at his daughter, 27 years old, decorated SEAL, 47, confirmed kills, shoulders carrying the weight of command like she'd been born to it. He saw her mother in her face, saw himself in her stance, saw something else. Too, something that made him proud and terrified in equal measure. She'd become the warrior he'd always hoped to be. I trust you, he said quietly. Elle nodded once. Then tomorrow at noon, don't interfere, no matter what happens. Can you do that? Every instinct Jack possessed screamed at him to say no, to protect his daughter the way he'd protected her since the day she was born. But he'd trained her too well to doubt her now. I can do that. Good. Elle started to leave, then turned back. Dad, thank you for not fighting Garrett. I know everyone thinks it makes you weak, but I know the truth. It makes you the strongest man I've ever met. She was gone before he could respond, Donovan following her out into the Montana afternoon. The bell chimed once as the door closed. Jack stood alone in his garage, surrounded by tools and memories and the ghost of the man he'd been. Outside, the sun was setting behind the mountains, painting the sky in shades of gold and red that reminded him of firefights in deserts half a world away. He thought about Harrison Kincaid, the teammate he'd nearly killed in a PTSD flashback in 1993. 32 years ago, but the memory was fresh as morning. The taste of blood, the sound of bones breaking, the moment he'd come back to himself and seen what his hands had done. That was the day he'd made his choice. Never again. Never lose control. Never let the monster out. Even if it meant taking a hit on camera for 4 million people to see. Even if it meant being called a coward. Jack picked up his phone, navigated to YouTube, found the video one more time. 4.1 million views now, growing by the second. The comments kept coming, each one a small violence of its own. But at the top of this comment section posted 3 minutes ago was something new, a video response, posted by an account named simply E. Blackwood LCDR USN. The thumbnail showed Elle in dress whites, standing at attention in front of an American flag. The title read, "Why My Father Didn't Fight Back and Why That Makes Him a Warrior." Jack clicked play. The next morning came too fast and too slow. Jack was up at 05:30, same as always. 5-mile run through the mountains, legs burning in the good way, lungs pulling in cold autumn air that tasted like pine and coming snow. Push-ups at the cabin 100 perfect form, the discipline of decades of training carved into muscle memory. Shower, coffee. Standing at his kitchen window, watching the sun rise over Lake Stillwater, painting the water in shades of amber and rose. His phone buzzed. Text from Dalton Whitmore. "Town square's already filling up. Whatever Elle's planning, half of Montana's going to see it. Be careful, Jack." Another text, this one from Bill Hartwick. "That video your daughter posted has 2 million views. People are talking. You raised her right." Jack hadn't watched Elle's video yet, couldn't bring himself to. Later he'd told himself. After today. After whatever was about to happen in the town square at noon. He looked at his reflection in the window's glass. 65 years old. Silver hair. Scars that told stories he'd never share. Face that had seen too much and showed it in the lines around his eyes. In 6 hours, the town of Pinewood Springs would gather to watch Garrett Crossland try to humiliate him again. And his daughter, his brilliant, dangerous, beautiful daughter, would teach everyone watching what real strength looked like. Jack just hoped she wouldn't have to compromise herself to do it. The phone rang. Elle. "Morning, Dad." "Morning." Jack kept his voice steady. "You sleep 4 hours. Enough." She heard background noise on her end, voices movement, the particular energy of operators preparing for a mission. "Listen, I need you to do something for me." "Name it." "Stay at the cabin until 11:30. Don't come to town early. Don't try to see what we're setting up." "Why?" "Because if you see the plan beforehand, you'll try to stop me, and I need you to trust this is going to work." Jack closed his eyes, took a breath. "Elle, if this puts you in danger." "Dad," her voice was gentle but firm. "I've conducted 43 direct action missions in 4 deployments. I've breached compounds defended by men who wanted to kill me. I've called airstrikes on targets 200 meters from my position. I know what I'm doing. This isn't Afghanistan. No, it's not. It's easier. Garrett Crossland is a bully with delusions of competence. I've faced actual warriors. He doesn't rate." Jack couldn't help but smile at that. "You sound like your mother." "Good." She was the smartest person in any room. Elle paused. "Dad, I'm not going to hurt Garrett. I'm going to do something worse. I'm going to expose him for exactly what he is. And I need you to be there when it happens. Not as the victim, as the man who taught me everything that matters." "When did you get so wise?" "Around the same time you stopped thinking of me as your little girl and started seeing me as an operator." She paused again, and when she spoke, her voice carried emotion she usually kept locked down tight. "I love you, Dad. See you at noon." She hung up before he could respond. Jack stood in his kitchen for another 5 minutes, phone in his hand, watching the sun climb higher over the mountains. Then he went to his bedroom, opened the closet, and pulled out something he hadn't worn in 8 years. His dress blues. 11:30 came. Jack climbed into his truck, a '96 Ford F-150, ancient and reliable, and started the drive into town. 12 miles of county road pine trees thick on both sides, the occasional mailbox marking driveways that led to cabins hidden in the woods. The roads were empty. Everyone was already in town. Main Street was packed when he arrived. Cars lined both sides, spilling over onto grass and sidewalks. People everywhere, 500-600 at least, maybe more. Jack recognized faces from the diner, the hardware store, the gas station. But there were strangers too, people from neighboring towns who'd driven in to watch the show. This was entertainment to them, real-life drama. The kind of thing you told your friends about afterward. Jack parked 3 blocks away, walked toward the square on foot. He wore his dress blues, ribbons, and medals, polished cover tucked under his left arm, boots spit shine the way they'd been when he first earned his trident in 1987. Every step felt measured, significant, like walking towards something that would change things in ways he couldn't predict. The town square was a modest space, maybe 50 feet across, with a gazebo in the center and benches arranged in a rough circle. Someone, probably Garrett, had set up a rope barrier, creating a makeshift arena. Cameras everywhere, people holding phones, a few professional rigs that suggested local news had shown up. Garrett stood in the center, surrounded by his men. 8 of them today, all younger, all carrying themselves like they thought muscle made them dangerous. Garrett himself looked pleased, that particular smile of someone who thought he'd already won. He saw Jack, and the smile widened. Well, well, the guest of honor arrives, and in uniform, planning to hide behind that chest full of ribbons, old man. The crowd murmured. Jack kept walking, steady pace, eyes forward. He stopped at the rope line 10 feet from Garrett. "I'm here," Jack said simply. "What do you want?" "What do I want?" Garrett laughed loud and performative. "I want everyone here to see what a real man looks like, not some washed-up has-been hiding in a garage. You had your chance to fight yesterday. You got embarrassed. So I'm giving you a second chance, right here, right now, in front of everyone. I'm not going to fight you, Garrett. Of course you're not, because you're weak, because that Navy SEAL shit is just a costume you wore, and underneath you're just a scared old man who... He's not scared." Elle's voice cut through Garrett's speech like a blade through paper, clear, strong, carrying across the square with the kind of projection that made everyone turn. She stepped through the crowd, and Jack's heart did something complicated in his chest. Elle wore civilian clothes, jeans, tactical boots, black t-shirt with her SEAL trident pin on the collar, hair pulled back, no sunglasses. Face calm, expression neutral, moving with the kind of confidence that came from knowing exactly what you were capable of. Donovan followed 2 steps behind, carrying a large duffel bag. Garrett's smile faltered just for a second, then recovered. "Well, well, Daddy's little princess came to protect him. What are you gonna do, sweetheart? Give me a stern lecture." Elle stopped at the rope line 5 feet from Garrett. When she spoke, her voice stayed professional, almost gentle. "Mr. Crossland, I'm Lieutenant Commander Eleanor Blackwood, United States Navy SEALs. I'm here to offer you 3 choices." "Choices," Garrett laughed again, but it sounded forced now. "I don't need choices from some choice one." Elle's voice didn't rise, didn't harden, but somehow cut through Garrett's bluster anyway. "Walk away, right now. Go home. No one gets hurt. No consequences beyond the ones already coming for you." "Already coming? What the hell does that mean?" "Choice 2. Elle continued like he hadn't spoken. "Touch me. Lay one finger on me. I'm a federal officer and there are 47 cameras recording this. Felony assault. 5 years minimum. Your choice. Garrett took a step toward her, then stopped, smart enough to recognize the trap. Choice 3, Elle said. Listen to what I have to say, then decide if you still want to fight my father. The crowd had gone silent. 600 people, and Jack could hear the wind moving through the pine trees at the edge of town. Garrett looked around, seemed to remember he had an audience, straightened his shoulders. Fine, say your piece. Then we'll see if Daddy's girl can back up all that Navy SEAL bullshit. Elle nodded once, looked at Donovan. Set up. Donovan moved with efficiency, pulling equipment from the duffel. A rifle case, spotting scope, tripod. 3 targets, paper standard IPSC silhouette, which he began carrying toward the far end of the square. What's this? Garrett asked, uncertainty creeping into his voice. You beat my father because you thought he was weak, Elle said, watching Donovan work. I'm here to educate you on what real strength looks like. Donovan placed the first target 100 yards away at the edge of the square, the second at 200 yards at the corner of Main Street, the third at 300 yards in front of the hardware store. Then he returned, opened the rifle case. The M40A3 sniper rifle gleamed in the late morning sun, every line of it speaking to precision and purpose. Elle lifted it out with the casual competence of someone who'd done this 1,000 times, checked the action, settled it against her shoulder like greeting an old friend. Mr. Crossland, she said, real warriors don't need to fight. We solve problems before they become fights. Watch. She dropped into a prone position right there in the town square, rifle steady eye to scope. The crowd pressed closer, everyone wanting to see. Jack watched his daughter work, saw her breathing regulate slow and controlled, saw her finger rest beside the trigger guard, not on it, waiting for the moment. Elle spoke without moving her eye from the scope voice carrying clearly. 100 yards, 3-mile-per-hour crosswind left to right. Temperature 52 degrees. Humidity 40%. She fired. The sound cracked across the square, sharp and clean. At the 100-yard line, the paper target showed a whole dead center mass. That's what I learned by age 12, Elle said. She adjusted, breathed, fired again. 200 yards. Dead center. That's what I could do by 16. The crowd was dead silent now. Even Garrett's men had stopped trying to look tough, focused instead on what they were witnessing. Elle made one more adjustment. 300 yards. Wind had picked up slightly, pushing the pine branches overhead. She compensated, breathed, fired. The third target took the round exactly where the first 2 had dead center mass. Elle stood safe, the rifle looked at Garrett. That's what 47 confirmed kills in Afghanistan looks like. The silence stretched. Then someone in the crowd started clapping. Another person joined. Within seconds, 600 people were applauding, the sound rolling across the town square like thunder. Elle waited for it to die down. When she spoke again, her voice stayed level, but carried something harder underneath. My father didn't fight you, Mr. Crossland, because he has something you'll never understand. Discipline, control. The ability to choose not to hurt someone, even when he could. She turned to face the crowd fully, now addressing everyone present. Garrett Crossland thinks violence equals strength. Let me show you what Garrett Crossland actually is. Donovan stepped forward again, this time with a tablet. He handed it to Elle, who connected it to a portable projector someone in the crowd had brought. The image appeared on the side of the gazebo, large enough for everyone to see. Bank records. These are protection payments from 31 businesses in Pinewood Springs, Elle said, her voice taking on the quality of someone giving a briefing. Professional, detached, devastating. Every month for 3 years, amounts ranging from $500 to $2,000, all going to accounts controlled by Garrett Crossland. The crowd murmured, business owners looking at each other, recognizing the truth when they saw it. Elle swiped to the next image. Text messages. These are threats sent by Garrett to business owners who refuse to pay. Mrs. Patricia Thornhill, Mr. Edwin Marsh, the Johnsons who own the diner, threats of vandalism, physical harm, destruction of their livelihoods. Another swipe, video footage. This is security camera footage from 2 months ago. Garrett Crossland assaulting Mr. Edwin Marsh behind the hardware store. Mr. Marsh is 73 years old. The assault put him in the hospital for 4 days. The murmuring got louder. Jack saw faces in the crowd changing, recognition and anger, mixing with something that looked like hope. And these, Elle said, swiping to a final series of images, are messages sent by Wyatt Crossland to Ainsley Whitmore. Cyberbullying, sexual harassment, threats. Ainsley hasn't been to school in 2 weeks because of this. She turned off the projector, looked at Garrett, who'd gone pale. You wanted to show everyone what a real man looks like, Elle said softly. Congratulations. You showed them exactly what you are. A coward. A bully. Someone who only picks on people who can't fight back. Garrett found his voice. This is bullshit. You can't prove any of... Sheriff Whitmore, Elle said without looking away from Garrett. Do you have those statements? Dalton. Whitmore stepped forward from the crowd holding a thick folder. 23 sworn statements from victims, all documented, all corroborated. And Agent Voss, Elle continued. A woman Jack didn't recognize moved through the crowd holding up FBI credentials. Garrett Crossland, you're under arrest for racketeering extortion assault. You can't. Garrett's voice had lost all its swagger, replaced with panic. Supervisor Burke will... Supervisor Leonard Burke was arrested 30 minutes ago, Agent Voss said calmly. Corruption, bribery, conspiracy. You're done, Mr. Crossland. Garrett's men scattered, just melted into the crowd, and disappeared like they'd never been there at all. Loyalty lasted exactly as long as the money. Garrett stood alone in the center of the square, surrounded by 600 people who'd seen exactly what he was. He looked at Jack desperately. This isn't fair. You were supposed to fight me. Jack stepped over the rope line, walked to his daughter's side. When he spoke, his voice carried the weight of 30 years of service, 32 years of controlled violence, 3 decades of choosing not to be the monster he could become. I've been fighting for 32 years, Jack said. Fighting my worst impulses. Fighting the part of me that wants to solve everything with violence. Fighting to stay the man my daughter could be proud of. You never learned to fight that battle, Garrett. That's why you lost. Elle looked at her father, and Jack saw pride in her eyes. Not for what she'd done, though, that was impressive enough, but for what he'd chosen not to do. Real strength, Elle said, still addressing Garrett, but speaking to the crowd, to the cameras, to everyone watching, is having the power to destroy someone and choosing justice instead. Agent Voss and 2 other FBI agents moved in, cuffing Garrett while reading him his rights. The crowd watched in silence, the only sound the wind through the trees, and Garrett's breathing rapid and panicked. In the front row of the crowd, Jack saw a teenage boy watching everything with tears running down his face. Wyatt Crossland, the son, seeing his father arrested, seeing his worldview shatter in real time. And next to Wyatt, a teenage girl, Ainsley Whitmore, not hiding anymore, standing there witnessing justice, happening, trembling, but present. Wyatt looked at Ainsley, opened his mouth, closed it. Then so quietly, Jack almost missed it. I'm sorry. Not enough. Could never be enough. But it was something. The FBI led Garrett away. The crowd began to disperse, people talking in hushed tones, processing what they'd witnessed. Jack stood in the center of the square with his daughter beside him, still in his dress blues, still carrying himself like the operator he'd been. Elle put her hand on his shoulder. You okay, Dad? Jack thought about that question, about the video that had 4 million views, about being called weak and pathetic and finished, about standing there and taking a hit he could have ended in seconds, about 32 years of choosing peace when he could have chosen war. I'm okay, he said, and meant it. Good. Elle smiled, that rare expression that reminded him so much of her mother. It hurt. Because we're not done yet. Trial's in 3 weeks. And I need you to testify about what real strength looks like. I will. They walked together toward Jack's truck, Donovan following a respectful distance behind. The sun was high overhead now, warming the Montana autumn air, making the mountains glow gold in the distance. Jack's phone buzzed. A text from Bill Hartwick. Your daughter's speech is already viral. 6 million views in 2 hours. You raised a warrior, Jack. Elle, Jack said as they reached his truck. Yeah, Dad. Thank you for believing I wasn't weak. She stopped, turned to face him fully. Dad, I've seen weak. I've fought weak. I've killed weak. You're not weak. You're the strongest man I know. You just needed someone to show everyone else what I've always seen. Jack pulled his daughter into a hug there on Main Street with half the town still watching. Held her tight the way he had when she was 8 years old, and he'd taught her to shoot when she was 18 and left for basic when she was 23 and earned her trident. I'm proud of you, he whispered. I learned from the best, she whispered back. They separated. Elle climbed into her rental car with Donovan. Jack got in his truck. As he started the engine, his phone buzzed again. A call this time. Unknown number. He answered. Blackwood. Master Chief, this is Agent Voss. I wanted to thank you for your cooperation. Your daughter's evidence package is going to put Garrett away for a long time. She did all the work. Maybe. But she learned from someone. Voss paused. Master Chief, between you and me. What you did yesterday, not fighting Crossland, that took more courage than any firefight. Most men can't do what you did. Most men haven't seen what happens when you lose control. No, sir, they haven't. Another pause. We'll be in touch about trial preparation. And Master Chief, your generation isn't finished. Not by a long shot. She hung up. Jack sat in his truck for a moment, engine idling, watching his daughter's car disappear down Main Street toward the highway that would take her back to Coronado, back to her team, back to the life she'd built being the warrior he'd trained her to be. 4 million people had watched him take a hit and called him weak. 6 million people had watched his daughter explain why they were wrong. Jack put the truck in gear and headed home to Lake Stillwater, to his cabin, to the peace he'd built over 8 years of choosing not to be the monster. Tomorrow would bring clarity. Tomorrow the trial would move forward. Tomorrow he'd understand what Elle had started. Tomorrow he'd start preparing for the trial that would finally bring Garrett Crossland to justice. But tonight, he'd sit on his porch and watch the sun set over the mountains and remember what his daughter had said. Real strength is having the power to destroy someone and choosing not to. The hardest trigger to pull is the one you don't pull. Jack Blackwood had spent 32 years learning that lesson. Today his daughter had taught it to the world, and that he thought as he drove toward home was a legacy worth building. The preliminary hearing was set for Monday morning, 9 days after Garrett Crossland's arrest in the town square. 9 days that felt like 9 years to everyone involved. Elle stayed in Montana. Not at Jack's cabin, she rented a room at the Pineview Inn, the town's only hotel, a modest 2-story building that had been there since the 1950s. Donovan took the room next door. They worked 18-hour days building the case that would ensure Garrett never terrorized anyone again. The video of the town square confrontation had gone viral in ways that transcended typical internet fame. 12 million views in the first week. News outlets picked it up. Think pieces appeared in military blogs, psychology journals, even a segment on 60 Minutes about bullying and veteran mental health. Elle's demonstration, 3 perfect shots, followed by a systematic dismantling of a criminal enterprise, had become a cultural moment. But viral fame and legal conviction were different things. Elle knew that. Had seen too many cases fall apart because evidence got suppressed, witnesses got intimidated, prosecutors got careless. This case wouldn't fall apart. She'd make sure of it. Jack spent those 9 days returning to routine. Up at 05:30, 5-mile run, push-ups, coffee. Work at the garage, which had suddenly gotten busy again. People who'd avoided him after the first video now showed up with cars that needed fixing repairs. They'd been putting off problems they wanted Jack Blackwood to solve because he was respectable again, a man worth knowing. He took the work. Didn't talk about what had happened. Didn't need to. The cars spoke for themselves, and Jack had always been better with engines than people anyway. But at night alone in his cabin, he watched Elle's video. The one she'd posted before the confrontation, the one titled, "Why My Father Didn't Fight Back, and Why That Makes Him a Warrior." She'd filmed it in her quarters at Coronado, sitting at her desk in dress whites, speaking directly to camera, with the kind of clarity that came from knowing exactly what she needed to say. The video was 11 minutes long. Jack had watched it 23 times, and each viewing hit differently. Elle spoke about Somalia, about the Battle of Mogadishu, about the teammates lost, about the violence that changed men in ways that couldn't be explained to people who hadn't lived it. She spoke about PTSD, about the particular torture of knowing you could kill someone with your bare hands and being terrified that someday you'd do it without meaning to. She spoke about her father, Commander Jack Blackwood. 3 Navy crosses, 30 years of service standing in a garage and taking a hit he could have ended in seconds because he'd made a choice 32 years ago to never let violence control him again. "My father is the strongest man I know," Elle said in the video, her voice steady and certain. "Not because of what he can do, because of what he chooses not to do. Every single day, he makes the hardest choice a warrior can make. He chooses peace when he has the power to choose war." The comments section had become a place of healing. Veterans sharing their own stories. People apologizing for calling Jack weak. Parents saying they were showing the video to their children, teaching them that real strength wasn't about dominance. One comment posted by someone named M. Kincaid had gotten 40,000 likes. "I'm Harrison Kincaid. Jack Blackwood nearly killed me in 1993 during a PTSD episode. I forgave him 30 years ago. He's spent 3 decades proving he's the man I always knew he was. Semper Fi, Master Chief." Jack had cried reading that. First time in 8 years. Now it was Monday morning and the hearing was in 2 hours. Jack stood in his bathroom, tying his tie dress blues, again full medals, every ribbon earned through blood and sacrifice. His hands didn't shake, steady as they'd been when he was 25 and doing this for the first time. His phone rang. L. Morning, Dad. You ready? As I'll ever be. Good. Listen, Garrett's lawyer is going to try something today. Agent Voss warned me. They're going to present video evidence that supposedly shows you threatening Garrett first before he hit you. Jack's jaw tightened. That didn't happen. I know, but they've got edited footage that makes it look like it did. Prosecutor thinks the judge might grant bail if the video is convincing enough. And if he grants bail, Garrett walks until trial, potentially intimidates witnesses, potentially flees. We can't let that happen. Elle paused. Dad, I need you to trust me. Whatever happens in that courtroom, whatever I do, trust that I've planned for this. I always trust you. Good. See you there. She hung up. Jack finished knotting his tie, looked at himself in the mirror. 65 years old. Silver hair. Dress blues that still fit perfectly because discipline didn't retire when you did. Face that had seen things most people couldn't imagine and carried the weight accordingly. Today he'd sit in a courtroom and watch his daughter outmaneuver lawyers who thought they were clever. Today he'd remember why he'd taught her everything he knew. Jack grabbed his keys and headed for the door. The Granite County Courthouse was a 2-story stone building that had been built in 1947 and hadn't changed much since. Courtroom 2 occupied the east wing oak paneling and high ceilings, the kind of formal space that was supposed to make you feel the weight of justice. Jack arrived 30 minutes early. The gallery was already half full, media in the back rows, locals in the middle, family members of Garrett's victims near the front. Mrs. Patricia Thornhill sat in the second row, 78 years old, and wearing her Sunday best. Mr. Edwin Marsh, the man Garrett had put in the hospital, sat beside her. Elle was at the prosecution table with the district attorney, a sharp woman named Judith Carver, who'd been handling felonies in Granite County for 15 years. Donovan sat in the front row of the gallery, positioned where he could see everything, hand resting casually near his jacket in a way that suggested he was armed and ready, despite being in a courthouse. Garrett sat at the defense table, looking smaller than he had in the town square. Orange jumpsuit hands cuffed in front of him, hair that hadn't been washed in 9 days. His lawyer was a slick-looking man in an expensive suit, the kind you flew in from Billings when you needed someone who played dirty. The lawyer's name was Marcus Thorne. Jack had looked him up. Former prosecutor turned defense attorney, won 80% of his cases through technicalities and aggressive cross-examination. Exactly the kind of opponent Elle would have prepared for. The bailiff called the room to order. All rise for the Honorable Judge Catherine Winters. Everyone stood. Judge Winters entered, mid-50s, gray hair, pulled back face that suggested she'd seen every trick in the book and wasn't impressed by any of them. She took her seat behind the bench, gestured for everyone to sit. We're here for preliminary hearing in the matter of United States versus Garrett Crossland. She said, her voice carrying the particular authority of someone who controlled her courtroom absolutely. Mr. Thorne, I understand you have a motion before we proceed. Thorne stood all confidence and practiced charm. Yes, Your Honor. The defense moves to suppress evidence and requests bail be granted for my client. Judge Winters raised an eyebrow. On what grounds? On the grounds that the arrest was predicated on false evidence, Your Honor. The prosecution's narrative is that my client initiated violence against Commander Jack Blackwood without provocation. We have video evidence that tells a different story. Murmurs in the gallery. Elle didn't move, didn't react, just sat there with the stillness of someone waiting for the enemy to step into a kill zone. "Let's see this video," Judge Winters said. Thorne nodded to his assistant, who set up a laptop connected to the courtroom's display screen. The video began playing. It was footage from the garage the day Garrett had hit Jack, but it had been edited, cut, and spliced in ways that changed the context entirely. In this version, Jack appeared to step toward Garrett aggressively. The audio had been manipulated to make Jack's calm words sound threatening. When Garrett pushed Jack, it looked like self-defense. When Garrett slapped him, it seemed like a reasonable response to provocation. Jack watched, feeling something cold settle in his gut. This was good work. Professional. The kind of editing that could fool people who wanted to believe it. "As you can see, Your Honor," Thorne said smoothly. "Commander Blackwood was the initial aggressor. My client responded to a perceived threat. The subsequent arrest, orchestrated by Commander Blackwood's daughter, a Navy SEAL with extensive combat training, appears to be retaliatory rather than lawful." Judge Winters looked at D.A. Carver. "Ms. Carver, what say you?" Carver stood, but before she could speak, Elle rose beside her. "Your Honor, may I address the court?" Judge Winters studied Elle for a moment. "You're Lieutenant Commander Blackwood." "Yes, Your Honor." "You're not counsel of record." "No, Your Honor, but I am a federal officer who participated in the investigation and arrest. I'd like to present evidence that directly contradicts what Mr. Thorne just showed the court." Thorne moved to object, but Judge Winters held up a hand. "I'll allow it. Commander Blackwood, proceed." Elle walked to the defense table where a laptop sat ready. Donovan had positioned it there that morning with the bailiff's permission. She opened it, connected it to the display screen. "What Mr. Thorne showed you was approximately 3 minutes of heavily edited footage," Elle said, her voice carrying clearly through the courtroom. "I have the complete unedited recording, 47 minutes, multiple angles, full audio spectrum." She hit play. The screen showed the garage from a different angle, body camera footage stable and clear. The timestamp was unbroken, the audio pristine. No cuts, no edits, just the continuous record of what had actually happened. Jack watched himself on screen. Watched Garrett arrive with his men. Watched the escalation, every word unambiguous. Garrett's threats. Jack's attempts at de-escalation. The push. The slap. The moment Jack went down. But more than that, the footage showed what came before. 20 minutes of Garrett walking around the garage, examining Jack's work, touching tools, creating a pretext for confrontation. The audio captured everything. "You think you're special?" Garrett's voice on the recording, clear as crystal. "You think that Navy SEAL shit matters? I own this town, old man, and I'm going to show everyone that you're nothing." The courtroom was silent except for the video playback. When it reached the slap, the sound echoed through the room like a gunshot. "Shut up, old man." The video continued past that point. Showed Garrett laughing, showed his son filming, showed them leaving, while Jack sat on the garage floor, bleeding. Elle stopped the playback. This footage was recorded by Senior Chief Donovan, who was conducting surveillance as part of a federal investigation into Mr. Crossland's criminal enterprise. Every frame is authenticated. Every second is verified. There are no edits. She turned to face Thorne, and Jack saw the look in her eyes, the same look she got when she had someone in her crosshairs, and knew the shot was good. "Mr. Thorne knows this footage exists," Elle continued. "He received it in discovery 6 days ago, which means he deliberately presented fabricated evidence to this court, which means he's committed fraud upon the tribunal." Thorne's face went pale. "Your Honor, Be quiet, Mr. Thorne. Judge Winter's voice was cold enough to freeze. She looked at Elle. Commander Blackwood, you can authenticate this footage. Yes, Your Honor. We have the original file's metadata intact chain of custody documented. FBI's forensic team has verified it's unaltered. I can provide written certification within the hour. Judge Winters turned her attention to Thorne, who looked like a man watching his career implode in real time. Mr. Thorne, I'm going to ask you one question, and I suggest you think very carefully before answering. Did you know that video you presented was edited? Thorne opened his mouth, closed it, looked at Garrett, who was staring at the table, looked back at the judge. Your Honor, I relied on what my client provided. That's not what I asked. Did you know? Silence stretched. Then so quietly it was almost a whisper. Yes, Your Honor. The gallery erupted. Judge Winters slammed her gavel. Order. I will have order in this courtroom. She waited for silence, then fixed Thorne with a look that could strip paint. Mr. Thorne, you are hereby held in contempt. Bailiff, take him into custody. I'll deal with Bar Association sanctions after we resolve this hearing. Two bailiffs moved forward, cuffing a stunned Marcus Thorne. He was led from the courtroom in silence, and Jack felt something almost like pity for the man. Almost. But you didn't present false evidence in court and expect sympathy. Judge Winters turned her attention to Garrett. Mr. Crossland, your motion to suppress evidence is denied. Your request for bail is denied. You will remain in federal custody until trial, which I'm setting for 3 weeks from today. She paused. And Mr. Crossland, I suggest you get a different lawyer, preferably one with ethics. Garrett slumped in his chair, looking smaller than ever. Judge Winters looked at Elle. Commander Blackwood, thank you for your service to this court. Your evidence presentation was exemplary. Thank you, Your Honor. This hearing is adjourned. The gavel came down. The courthouse steps were crowded with media when Jack and Elle emerged 20 minutes later. Cameras, microphones, reporters shouting questions that blurred together into white noise. Elle stopped at the top of the steps, and the crowd quieted everyone wanting to hear what she'd say. I'll make a brief statement, she said. No questions after. The cameras focused. Elle looked directly into them, speaking with the same clarity she'd used in her viral video. Today, justice moved forward. Garrett Crossland will face trial for his crimes that hurt dozens of people in this community. His attempt to manipulate the legal system failed because evidence doesn't lie. She paused, letting that sink in. I want to say something to everyone watching this, especially victims of bullying. You are not powerless. Document everything. Report every incident. Find allies. Support each other. The system works when good people refuse to stay silent. Another pause. Jack stood beside her, silent and proud. My father taught me that true warriors protect, not dominate. That's a lesson Garrett never learned. Garrett Crossland never learned that lesson. Today proved why that matters. Elle stepped back, signaling she was done. The reporters surged forward with questions anyway, but Donovan was already there, creating space for them to move to Jack's truck. They drove in silence for the first 5 minutes, heading out of town toward Lake Stillwater. Elle rode in the passenger seat, Donovan following in his rental car. The afternoon sun painted the mountains in shades of gold and orange autumn at its peak. You planned for that, Jack finally said. The fake video. You knew Thorne would try it. Agent Voss warned me 6 days ago. She'd seen Thorne use that tactic before. Elle looked out the window. I made sure Donovan's body cam footage was bulletproof. Every metadata field verified. Every chain of custody step documented. When Thorne showed his edited version, I had proof he was lying. You set him up. I gave him enough rope to hang himself. He made the choice to use it. She turned to look at Jack. Garrett's going away for a long time, Dad. Thorne's career is over. The message is sent: bullies face consequences. Jack drove in silence for another minute. Then, your mother would have been proud of you. Elle's expression softened. She was proud of you. Even after Somalia. Even after the PTSD. She told me once that loving you meant accepting all of you, the warrior, and the man trying not to be one. I miss her. Me too. They reached the cabin as the sun touched the mountain peaks. Jack parked and they sat there for a moment, neither moving to get out. I'm going back to Coronado tomorrow, Elle said. Have to get back to my team. But I'll be here for the trial. Every day. I promise. I know you will. Elle opened her door, then paused. Dad, there's something I need to tell you. Something Mom said before she died. Jack looked at her, saw vulnerability in her eyes that she rarely showed. She said you'd spent 30 years thinking you were broken, Elle continued. But she never saw you that way. She saw a man strong enough to control the most dangerous thing in the world himself. She said that's what made you a warrior, not what you did in combat, what you chose not to do after. Jack felt his throat tighten. She said that, her exact words, she made me promise that if you ever doubted yourself, if you ever thought the PTSD made you weak, I'd remind you. Real strength is living with your choices. You've done that for 32 years. That's more heroic than anything you did in uniform. They got out of the truck, walked to the cabin together. Inside, Jack made coffee while Elle sat at the kitchen table answering emails on her phone. Donovan stayed outside, giving them space but staying alert. The coffee brewed, filling the cabin with warmth and the smell of normalcy. Jack poured 2 cups, handed one to Elle, sat across from her. What happens now? He asked. Now we wait for trial. Carver's got 47 counts she's prosecuting. Garrett's looking at 12 to 15 years if he's convicted on all of them. Elle sipped her coffee. But more than that, the town's healing. 23 victims have come forward. The protection racket is shut down. Burke's resignation opened up an investigation into county corruption that's going to clean house. And Wyatt, Elle's expression complicated. That's harder. He's 19, legally an adult. He's facing charges for cyberbullying and harassment. But Ainsley Whitmore, the girl he tormented, she asked the DA to offer him a deal. Therapy, community service, public apology in exchange for reduced charges. That's generous of her. It's brave. Ainsley's choosing healing over revenge. That takes more strength than most people have. Elle set down her coffee. Wyatt came to see me yesterday, at the hotel, wanted to apologize. What did you say? I said, apology isn't enough. I told him he has a choice: become his father or become something better. Told him it would be the hardest work he'd ever do, but I'd help if he was serious about changing. Jack studied his daughter. You're going to mentor him. Someone has to. His father taught him all the wrong lessons. Maybe I can teach him some right ones. She smiled slightly. Besides, breaking the cycle of bullying is how you prevent the next Garrett Crossland. Wyatt's young enough to change, if he puts in the work. You think he will? I think watching his father get arrested in front of 600 people scared him straight. Whether that fear becomes real change? Elle shrugged. That's up to him. They finished their coffee in comfortable silence. Outside, the sun had set, leaving the sky painted in shades of purple and deep blue, stars beginning to emerge, the kind of night that made you believe in peace. Elle's phone buzzed. She glanced at it, smiled. Morrison sent a message. The team wants to know when I'm coming back. They've got a new batch of candidates who need humbling. How do you humble a SEAL candidate? By showing them that competence isn't about ego. It's about being good enough that you don't need to prove it. She stood stretched. Same lesson you taught me. Jack walked her to the door. Donovan was waiting by the rental car, scanning the tree line with the automatic awareness of someone who'd spent too many years in hostile territory. Elle hugged her father, held on longer than usual. I'm proud of you, Dad, for everything you've done, everything you've chosen not to do. You're my hero. You've always been my hero. Jack held his daughter, this warrior he'd raised, this woman who'd taken his lessons and made them her own. Get some rest, he said. Long flight tomorrow. You too, you look tired. I am tired, but it's the good kind, the kind that comes from doing the right thing. Elle smiled, kissed his cheek, and walked to the car. Donovan nodded respectfully to Jack before getting in the driver's seat. The car pulled away, taillights disappearing down the long driveway toward the county road. Jack stood on his porch for a long time after they left, looking at the stars, listening to the night sounds of the Montana wilderness. An owl called from somewhere in the pines. A fish jumped in the lake, ripples spreading in the moonlight. His phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. He opened it. Master Chief Blackwood, this is Wyatt Crossland. Commander L gave me your number. I know I don't deserve anything from you, but I wanted to say I'm sorry for everything. My dad taught me to be strong by hurting people. You taught your daughter to be strong by protecting them. I want to learn what you know, if you'll teach me. Jack stared at the message for a long time, thought about cycles of violence and cycles of healing, thought about his own father who'd taught him to be a warrior, thought about Elle who'd learned those lessons and made them better, thought about second chances and redemption and whether some people deserved them. Finally, he typed a response. Come by the garage Monday morning, 6 a.m., bring work gloves. We'll talk while we work. He hit send. 3 dots appeared immediately, Wyatt typing. Then, thank you, Master Chief. I won't let you down. Jack put his phone away and went inside. Tomorrow he'd go for his run. Work at the garage. Live his life the way he'd been living it for 8 years, with discipline, with purpose, with the knowledge that real strength was choosing peace every single day. But now, there was something new. A kid who needed teaching. A cycle that could be broken. A chance to pass on the lessons he'd learned not in combat, but in 32 years of refusing to let combat define him. Jack lay in bed that night thinking about Elle's words. About being proud. About being a hero, not for what you did, but for what you chose not to do. He thought about Linda, his wife, dead 15 years now, but still present in every choice he made. She'd seen him at his worst, the PTSD episodes, the nightmares, the days he couldn't get out of bed. And she'd loved him anyway, believed in him anyway, told him he was stronger than he knew. She'd been right. Jack closed his eyes and slept without dreaming. The first peaceful sleep he'd had in 9 days. The sleep of a man who'd done the right thing and knew it. Outside, the stars wheeled overhead. The mountains stood eternal. The lake reflected moonlight like scattered diamonds. And in Pinewood Springs, 23 victims of Garrett Crossland's tyranny slept a little easier, knowing justice was coming. In Coronado, Elle Blackwood packed her bag for the flight home, already planning the lessons she'd teach her next class of SEAL candidates, already thinking about how to break the cycle of violence by teaching young warriors the same lesson her father had taught her. The hardest trigger to pull is the one you don't pull. And in a cell in the Granite County Jail, Garrett Crossland lay awake, finally understanding what real strength looked like. finally understanding what he'd never be. 3 weeks until trial. 3 weeks until justice. The hardest lessons took time to learn, but some people needed to learn them the hard way. Garrett Crossland was about to become a very educated man. The trial began on a cold November morning, 3 weeks after the preliminary hearing. First snow of the season had fallen overnight, dusting the mountains in white, turning Pinewood Springs into something from a Christmas card. Beautiful and deceptive the way Montana could be when it wanted to remind you that beauty and brutality lived side by side. Jack drove into town at 7:30, truck tires crunching on frost-covered asphalt. The courthouse parking lot was already half full despite the early hour. Media vans with satellite dishes. Cars from 3 counties over. This trial had become something bigger than Garrett Crossland's crimes. It had become a referendum on bullying, on veteran mental health, on what real strength looked like in a world that often mistook cruelty for power. Elle was waiting on the courthouse steps, dressed in her service dress blues, the Navy's formal uniform, ribbons gleaming in the morning light, trident pin catching the sun. She'd flown in from Coronado 2 days ago, would stay through the trial's conclusion no matter how long it took. Donovan stood beside her, also in uniform, senior chief's anchors on his collar, the quiet professionalism of a man who'd been in enough courtrooms to know how they worked. Behind them, Agent Cordelia Voss from the FBI carrying a briefcase that probably contained enough evidence to bury Garrett 10 times over. "Morning, Dad." Elle's breath misted in the cold air. "Morning." Jack climbed the steps, and Elle fell into step beside him. They walked together into the courthouse, through metal detectors manned by bailiffs who nodded respectfully into Courtroom 2, where justice was about to be served or denied, depending on how the next few days went. The gallery was packed. Every seat taken standing room only in the back. Jack recognized faces from the town square confrontation. Mrs. Patricia Thornhill in the front row wearing her Sunday best again. Mr. Edwin Marsh beside her walking with a cane, now from injuries that hadn't fully healed. The Johnsons from the diner. Bill Hartwick. Sheriff Dalton Whitmore and his daughter Ainsley sitting together presenting a united front. And in the back row, trying to be invisible but failing, Wyatt Crossland. Jack had seen Wyatt twice in the past 3 weeks. The kid had shown up at the garage that first Monday at 6 a.m. like he'd promised, wearing work gloves, ready to do whatever Jack asked. They'd spent 4 hours changing oil rotating tires, barely speaking. But the work said what words couldn't. Wyatt was trying, showing up, doing the hard thing. The second time Wyatt had asked questions. About the Navy, about Somalia, about how you lived with yourself after making hard choices. Jack had answered honestly, not sugarcoating anything, giving Wyatt the truth in all its uncomfortable complexity. Now Wyatt sat in the courtroom watching his father face consequences for 30 years of choices that had led to this moment. The kid's face was pale, eyes hollow with lack of sleep, but he was present. That counted for something. All rise for the Honorable Judge Catherine Winters. Everyone stood. Judge Winters entered, took her seat, surveyed the courtroom with the kind of attention that missed nothing. "We're here for trial in the matter of United States versus Garrett Crossland. Is the prosecution ready?" District Attorney Judith Carver stood. "Ready, Your Honor." "Is the defense ready?" Garrett's new lawyer stood a public defender named Robert Chen Young, an earnest, probably drawing the short straw when Thorne got disbarred. "Ready, Your Honor." Jack almost felt sorry for Chen. You didn't win cases like this. You just tried to minimize the damage. "Let's proceed. Ms. Carver, your opening statement." Carver moved to address the jury, 12 people from across Granite County, faces that represented the community Garrett had terrorized. She stood before them with the confidence of someone who had truth on her side. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, over the next few days, You're going to hear about a man who built an empire on fear. Garrett Crossland didn't use guns or violence alone, though there was plenty of both. He used something more insidious. He used the threat of violence, the promise of suffering, the knowledge that if you stood up to him, he would destroy you. Carver walked slowly along the jury box, making eye contact with each juror. You'll hear from 23 victims, business owners who paid protection money rather than risk their livelihoods, elderly citizens who were assaulted when they refused to comply, a teenage girl who was cyberbullied so severely she stopped going to school. And you'll hear from Commander Jack Blackwood, a decorated Navy SEAL who was beaten in public because he represented something Garrett Crossland could never be: a man of genuine strength and character. She paused. Let that sink in. The defense will try to convince you that Mr. Crossland was misunderstood, that he was defending himself, that the evidence against him is circumstantial or exaggerated, but evidence doesn't lie. Video doesn't lie. Bank records don't lie. And 23 victims can't all be wrong. Carver returned to the prosecution table. At the end of this trial, I'm going to ask you to do something simple but profound. Hold Garrett Crossland accountable for his choices. Thank you. She sat. Judge Winters looked at the defense table. Mr. Chen, your opening statement. Chen stood, and Jack could see the young lawyer struggling with what to say. How do you defend the indefensible? How do you make a jury sympathize with a man who terrorized an entire community? Ladies and gentlemen, Chen began, my client made mistakes. I won't stand here and tell you otherwise, but the prosecution wants you to see Garrett Crossland as a monster, as someone beyond redemption. I ask that you see him as a human being, flawed, troubled, but human. It was a weak opening, and everyone knew it. Chen knew it. He sat down quickly, probably already planning his closing argument around mitigation and sentencing recommendations. Judge Winters nodded. Ms. Carver, call your first witness. The prosecution calls Mrs. Patricia Thornhill. The elderly widow walked to the witness stand with dignity despite her age. The bailiff swore her in. She sat, hands folded in her lap, looking directly at the jury with the kind of strength that came from surviving 8 decades on Earth. Carver approached gently. Mrs. Thornhill, how long have you lived in Pinewood Springs? 56 years. My husband and I moved here in 1969. And you own the Thornhill Bakery on Main Street? Yes, my husband started it. I've run it since he passed in 2008. Can you tell the jury about your interactions with Garrett Crossland? Mrs. Thornhill took a breath, and when she spoke, her voice was steady. It started about 3 years ago. Mr. Crossland came into my bakery and said I needed protection, said the town was getting dangerous, that for $500 a month, he'd make sure nothing happened to my shop. What did you say? I told him no. I said Pinewood Springs was safe and I didn't need protection. What happened next? A week later, someone threw a brick through my window, middle of the night, destroyed a display case that had been my husband's. The police couldn't find who did it. Mrs. Thornhill's hands tightened slightly. Mr. Crossland came by the next day, said it was a shame about the window, said maybe I'd reconsider his offer. Did you? Yes. I paid him $500 a month for 34 months, $17,000 total. Murmurs in the gallery. Carver let them settle. Mrs. Thornhill, why didn't you report this to the police? The elderly woman looked at Garrett, who wouldn't meet her eyes. Because Mr. Crossland told me what happened to people who talked. He showed me pictures of Mr. Marsh after he was beaten. Said that could happen to me too if I wasn't careful. No further questions, Your Honor. Chen declined to cross-examine. Smart. You didn't attack a 78-year-old widow in front of a jury if you wanted any chance of sympathy. The parade of witnesses continued through the morning and into the afternoon. Business owners testifying about extortion. Edwin Marsh describing his assault in painful detail, showing the jury scars that would never fully heal. Sheriff Whitmore explaining how Garrett's connection to County Supervisor Burke had hamstrung investigations for 3 years. Each testimony built on the last, creating a picture of systematic terrorization that was impossible to deny. Then, at 3 in the afternoon, Carver called Ainsley Whitmore. The 17-year-old girl walked to the witness stand with visible anxiety, hands trembling slightly as she was sworn in. Elle leaned forward, watching intently. This was the hardest testimony a teenager reliving trauma in front of a courtroom full of strangers. Carver's voice was gentle. Ainsley, I know this is difficult. Take your time. Can you tell the jury about your relationship with Wyatt Crossland? Ainsley glanced at the back row where Wyatt sat, then looked away. We went to school together. He asked me out last spring. I said no. What happened after you said no? He started posting things about me online. Lies. Saying I'd done things I hadn't done. Then he photoshopped pictures of me, made them look inappropriate. Posted them where everyone at school could see. Her voice cracked. Carver waited. He sent me messages every day. Called me names, said no one would believe me if I told anyone because his father ran the town. Said I should kill myself because no one would miss me. The courtroom was absolutely silent. How long did this continue? 3 months. Until I stopped going to school. I couldn't face people anymore. Everyone had seen the pictures, even though they were fake. I just wanted to disappear. Ainsley, do you know who told Wyatt to do this? The girl nodded, tears streaming down her face now. After Mr. Crossland was arrested, Wyatt apologized. He said his father told him to do it, said I needed to be taught a lesson because my father was the sheriff, said it was about power. Carver let that statement hang in the air. Then, thank you, Ainsley. You're very brave. Chen stood for cross-examination, but his heart clearly wasn't in it. Miss Whitmore, did Garrett Crossland ever personally send you messages or post anything about you? No, but Wyatt told me his father ordered him to, that it was a direct instruction. But you didn't hear Garrett Crossland say that himself? No. Chen sat down. It was the best he could do, establish that some of the testimony was hearsay. But Ainsley's pain was real, and juries believed victims who cried. Court adjourned at 5. Jack walked out with Elle into the cold November afternoon, the sun already setting behind the mountains. Tomorrow's your turn, Elle said quietly. Jack nodded. He'd known it was coming. The prosecution's star witness, the decorated veteran who'd been beaten on camera, whose refusal to fight back had sparked this entire case. You ready? Elle asked. No, but I'll do it anyway. They had dinner at the cabin that night, Elle, Jack, and Donovan. Simple meal, steak and potatoes, the kind of food that stuck to your ribs. They didn't talk about the trial. Talked instead about Coronado, about Elle's team, about the new batch of SEAL candidates who were getting their souls crushed in Hell Week. After dinner, Elle stood by the window watching the snow fall outside. The mountains were disappearing into white, the world becoming quiet and clean. Dad, do you remember what you told me when I was 8? The first time you taught me to shoot. Jack joined her at the window. I told you a lot of things when you were 8. You said, The most important lesson isn't how to hit the target. It's knowing when not to pull the trigger. Elle turned to face him. I didn't understand it then. Thought you were just being cautious. But watching you with Garrett, watching this trial, I finally get it. You've been living that lesson for 32 years. Jack was quiet for a moment. Your mother understood it, even when I didn't. She saw who you really were, just like I do now. Elle placed her hand on his shoulder. Get some sleep. Tomorrow you tell your story to the jury, and they'll see it too. Not the kills, not the medals, the choice. Jack closed the journal, handed it back to his daughter. Your grandfather died when I was 12. I never got to ask him about the war. Maybe you didn't need to. Maybe he showed you everything that mattered, just by how he lived after. Elle stood, kissed Jack's forehead. Get some sleep. Tomorrow you tell your story, and the world listens. That night, Jack lay in bed thinking about his father, about choices made in moments of rage that defined the rest of your life, about the power to destroy and the strength to protect, about legacy and what you passed down to the people you loved. He slept fitfully, dreams mixing with memories, Somalia and Montana combat, and cabins, violence and peace, all bleeding together in the way trauma did when you'd lived with it long enough. Morning came too fast. Jack took the witness stand at 10 a.m. after Judge Winters had dispensed with preliminary matters and jury instructions. The courtroom was even more packed than yesterday, word having spread that the decorated seal was testifying. Carver approached with respect. Please state your name and occupation for the record. Commander Jack Blackwood, United States Navy, retired. Commander Blackwood, how long did you serve? 30 years, 1987 to 2017. And during that service, you were a Navy SEAL. Yes, ma'am. Carver walked him through his service record. Desert Storm, Somalia. Operations in 17 countries he couldn't name because they were still classified. 3 Navy Crosses, Silver Stars, Purple Hearts. By the time she finished, every juror was looking at Jack with the kind of respect you gave someone who'd bled for their country. Then Carver shifted. Commander Blackwood, can you tell the jury about October 12th of this year, the day you encountered Garrett Crossland at your garage? Jack took a breath, organized his thoughts the way he'd been trained to deliver situation reports, clear, chronological, unemotional. I was working on a customer's vehicle. Mr. Crossland arrived with 5 other men. He demanded I pay him protection money. I refused. He became aggressive. What do you mean by aggressive? He pushed me, called me names, said my service didn't matter, that I was weak, that he owned the town, and I needed to understand my place in it. What did you do? I attempted to de-escalate. I told him I didn't want trouble, asked him to leave. Did he leave? No, ma'am. He struck me across the face. I fell. He stood over me and said, Jack's voice stayed steady. He said, "Shut up, old man." Why didn't you fight back? This was the question everyone wanted answered. The question that 4 million people had asked in comment sections. The question that had defined the entire case. Jack looked at the jury, saw 12 faces waiting for truth. Because I was afraid of what I'd become if I did. Silence. Carver let it stretch. Can you explain that, Commander? In 1993, I was involved in the Battle of Mogadishu, Somalia. You might know it as Black Hawk Down. Jack's hands resting on the witness box rail tightened slightly. I lost friends in that battle. Good men. The kind of men who deserved to come home and didn't. He paused, gathering himself. After the battle, I suffered from PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder. One night during a flashback, I attacked a teammate, Harrison Kincaid. I broke his jaw, fractured 3 ribs, nearly killed him. I don't remember any of it. That's what PTSD does. It takes control away from you. What happened after that incident? I got help, therapy, medication, years of work to manage the condition, and I made myself a promise I would never lose control again. I would never let violence be my first response. I would choose restraint even when it cost me. Even when it meant taking a beating on camera. Especially then. Jack looked directly at Garrett, who was staring at the defense table. Mr. Crossland thought not fighting back made me weak. But I know the truth. It takes more strength to walk away from a fight you could win than it does to throw a punch. Any fool can hit someone. It takes a warrior to choose not to. Carver nodded. No further questions, Your Honor. Chen stood for cross-examination, looking deeply uncomfortable. Commander Blackwood, you have extensive hand-to-hand combat training, correct? Yes. You could have defended yourself without seriously injuring my client. Probably. But that assumes perfect control in a high-stress situation. PTSD doesn't work that way. Once I start, I might not be able to stop. So you're saying you're a danger to others? Jack met Chen's eyes. I'm saying I know my limitations. I know what I'm capable of. And I choose not to put myself in situations where those capabilities might hurt people who don't deserve it. But Mr. Crossland deserved it. Mr. Crossland deserved to face justice through the legal system, not through my fists. Chen had no response to that. He sat down. Judge Winters looked at Carver. Redirect. Just one question, Your Honor. Carver approached Jack again. Commander Blackwood, do you regret not fighting Garrett Crossland? Jack thought about that question. About the video that had gone viral. About being called weak and pathetic. About his daughter flying across the country to defend his honor. About sitting here now testifying, exposing his PTSD to the world. No, ma'am. I don't regret it at all. Why not? Because my daughter was watching, and I'd rather she see me choose peace than become the kind of man who solves problems with violence. That's the legacy I want to leave. Carver smiled. Thank you, Commander. No further questions. Jack stepped down from the witness stand and returned to his seat in the gallery. Elle reached over, squeezed his hand once. That was enough. The trial continued for 2 more days. FBI forensic accountants testified about the money trail. Computer experts explained how Garrett had orchestrated the cyberbullying campaign. Agent Voss walked the jury through the entire investigation with methodical precision. The defense called no witnesses. Chen knew he had nothing to work with. His closing argument focused on mitigation, Garrett's troubled childhood lack of role models, the cycle of violence he'd been caught in. It was the best he could do with an impossible case. Carver's closing was devastating. She systematically destroyed every excuse, every justification, every attempt to minimize what Garrett had done. She showed the jury video of Jack being beaten, showed them Ainsley's tears, showed them bank records proving 34 months of extortion. Ladies and gentlemen, Carver said, standing before the jury for the last time, this case is about choices. Garrett Crossland chose to terrorize this community, chose to beat an elderly man, chose to order his son to destroy a teenage girl's life. Those were choices, and choices have consequences. She paused, making eye contact with each juror. Commander Jack Blackwood also made choices. He chose restraint when he could have chosen violence, chose justice when he could have chosen revenge, chose to be the kind of man his daughter could be proud of. Those choices matter. They show us what real strength looks like. She walked back to the prosecution table. I ask you to hold Garrett Crossland accountable for his choices. Find him guilty. Show this community that bullies don't win. Thank you. The jury deliberated for 4 hours. Jack spent those hours walking the courthouse halls with Elle and Donovan, unable to sit still, unable to eat, just moving, because movement was better than thinking. Elle stayed close, not saying much, just present in the way she'd learned from years of combat, where sometimes just being there was enough. At 4:30 in the afternoon, the bailiff announced the jury had reached a verdict. The courtroom filled again. Jack sat in the front row, Elle beside him, Donovan on her other side. Behind them, the gallery packed with victims, supporters, media, everyone who had a stake in this outcome. Judge Winters took the bench. Has the jury reached a verdict? The foreman stood a rancher named Tom Caldwell who'd lived in Granite County his entire life. We have your honor. On the charge of racketeering, how do you find guilty? On the charges of extortion, counts 1 through 31, how do you find guilty on all counts? On the charges of assault, counts 1 through 12, how do you find guilty on all counts? It continued. 47 counts, 47 guilty verdicts. By the end, Garrett was slumped in his chair, the reality of what was happening finally penetrating. Judge Winters thanked the jury, set sentencing for 2 weeks. The bailiffs led Garrett away in handcuffs. He looked smaller than ever, like he'd been deflated, the bluster and bravado gone. As he passed Jack's row, Garrett stopped, looked at him. For a moment, Jack saw something in the man's eyes that might have been understanding, might have been respect, might have been the first genuine emotion Garrett Crossland had felt in years. You were right, Garrett said quietly. You were the strongest man I ever met. I just couldn't see it. Then he was gone, led away to await sentencing, to face the consequences of 3 years of choices that had brought him to this moment. 2 weeks later, the courthouse filled again for sentencing. Garrett stood before Judge Winters, smaller somehow than he'd been at trial, the orange jumpsuit hanging loose on a frame that had lost weight from stress. Judge Winters looked at the sentencing guidelines, then at Garrett, then at the gallery filled with his victims. Mr. Crossland, I've presided over this bench for 18 years. I've sentenced murderers, drug dealers, domestic abusers. But your case is unique. You didn't just commit crimes, you created a culture of fear in an entire community. She paused, letting her words settle. You targeted the elderly, veterans, children, people who represented values. You lacked honor, integrity, strength. You mistook Commander Blackwood's discipline for weakness. That miscalculation cost you everything. Garrett's lawyer started to speak, but Judge Winters held up a hand. The profound irony, Mr. Crossland, is that you demonstrated the very weakness you accused others of having. Lack of self-control, fear disguised as aggression, cowardice masked as dominance. You had every physical advantage over Commander Blackwood. He had something you'll never possess: character. She looked at her notes. On 47 counts, you are sentenced to 12 years in federal prison with no possibility of parole for 8 years. You will pay $470,000 in restitution to your victims. Upon release, you will be subject to 5 years supervised probation and permanent restraining orders. The gavel came down. Garrett turned as the bailiffs approached. His eyes found Jack in the gallery one last time. No anger now, just understanding that came too late. "I'm sorry," Garrett mouthed. Jack nodded once. Acceptance, not forgiveness. Some lessons had to be learned the hard way. The courtroom emptied slowly. Jack stood feeling like he'd been carrying weight for weeks and could finally set it down. Elle hugged him fierce and proud. Donovan shook his hand with the firm grip of respect between warriors. Outside the courthouse steps were chaos. Media cameras, people wanting comments. Carver handled it, giving a statement about justice and accountability and sending a message to bullies everywhere. But Jack slipped away with Elle and Donovan walking to his truck in the parking lot, leaving the circus behind. They drove in silence back to the cabin. The sun was setting again, painting the mountains in gold and crimson, the first stars appearing in a sky so clear it hurt to look at. At the cabin, Jack made coffee while Elle sat at the kitchen table. Donovan stood by the window watching the lake, giving them space. "It's over," Elle said. "Not yet, still have sentencing. But the hard part's over. The verdict's in, justice won." Jack poured coffee, sat across from his daughter. "What happens now with Wyatt?" "I meant what I told him. If he's serious about changing, I'll help. Already talked to a therapist in Billings who specializes in behavioral modification for young adults. And Ainsley agreed to participate in restorative justice sessions if Wyatt completes the program." "You think he can change?" Elle sipped her coffee, considering. "I think he's young enough that the pattern isn't set. I think seeing his father convicted scared him. Whether fear becomes real change." She shrugged. "That's up to him. But everyone deserves a chance to be better than they were." "Your mother would have said the same thing." "I know. That's where I learned it." They sat in comfortable silence, drinking coffee, watching the last light fade from the sky. Donovan excused himself, said he'd check the perimeter, which meant he was giving them privacy. After he left, Elle pulled out her phone. "I want to show you something. It's a video that posted today. Already has 8 million views." She turned the phone so Jack could see. The video showed Ainsley Whitmore standing in front of her school, speaking to a camera with the kind of strength that came from surviving. "My name is Ainsley Whitmore," the girl said, voice clear and steady. 6 weeks ago, I wanted to die. I'd been cyberbullied for 3 months. I felt powerless, voiceless, alone. Then Commander Eleanor Blackwood showed me something. She showed me that bullies only have power if victims stay silent, so I'm not staying silent anymore. The video cut to Ainsley standing with other students, 10 of them all holding signs about anti-bullying initiatives. "We're starting a program at our school called the Blackwood Protocol. 4 steps, document everything, report every incident, support each other, face consequences." It's named after Commander Jack Blackwood, who showed us that real strength is choosing not to hurt people even when you could. Ainsley looked directly into the camera. "If you're being bullied, you're not alone. If you're scared to speak up, I understand. But I'm proof that speaking up works. Justice works. Good people will stand with you. Don't give up." The video ended. Jack stared at the phone for a long moment. Then he set it down, unable to speak past the tightness in his throat. "You changed things, Dad," Elle said softly. "Not just for Garrett's victims. For everyone watching. 8 million people have seen Ainsley's video. Schools in 40 states are reaching out asking about the Blackwood Protocol. You started something bigger than you know." "I just didn't want to hit someone." "I know, and that's what makes it matter." Elle stood, walked to the window where Donovan had been. "I have to go back to Coronado tomorrow. Team needs me. but I'll be here for sentencing. And Dad, yeah, thank you for being exactly who you are, for never pretending to be something you're not, for showing me that real warriors choose their battles, and the hardest battle is always with yourself. Jack joined his daughter at the window. Together, they looked out at the lake, at the mountains, at the Montana wilderness that had given him peace after 30 years of war. Your mother used to say that strength isn't what you do, Jack said. It's what you refuse to do. Took me a long time to understand that. You understand it now. Yeah, I do. They stood there together, father and daughter, two warriors who'd learned the same lesson through different paths. That real strength was having power and choosing not to abuse it. That the hardest trigger to pull was the one you didn't pull. That legacy wasn't measured in kills, but in the lives you chose not to destroy. Outside, the stars emerged one by one, the same stars that had looked down on Jack in Somalia, in Iraq, in 17 countries where he'd been the most dangerous man in the room. The same stars that watched him now in his cabin by the lake, finally at peace with the choices he'd made. His phone buzzed. A text from Wyatt. Thank you for today. Master Chief, Ainsley's video made me cry. I want to be part of the solution like she is. See you Monday at the garage. Jack texted back. Monday at 6. Be ready to work. 3 dots. Then, I will be. I promise. Jack put his phone away and poured more coffee. Tomorrow, Elle would fly back to California. Tomorrow, Wyatt would continue his journey toward redemption. Tomorrow, the world would keep turning. But tonight, Jack Blackwood sat in his cabin with his daughter, drinking coffee, watching stars, and knowing that sometimes the bravest thing you could do was nothing at all. Sometimes choosing peace was the ultimate act of war. And sometimes, just sometimes, the right choice was the hardest one. Jack had made that choice 32 years ago, made it again 3 weeks ago, would make it every day for the rest of his life. That was the Blackwood legacy. That was what warriors became when the war finally ended. That was strength.